So we now have 25 attendees. It's very nice to be here. I just want to thank you, Gemma, who has really helped me put this together, from putting together the image, the placeholder. So thank you very much, Gemma, for being behind the scenes. And also, if you have questions, I think we're going to open a Q&A at the end. So the way we're going to run this is, well, first, let me introduce the event. So this is the first event of the MBA Speaker Series. The MBA Speaker Series is a series in which we invite our alumni to come back and contribute to a topic, alongside some experts from that topic. Today we have 3 panelists. We have Victoria Curtin, who is the regional director for NatWest. She will introduce herself in a second. We have Emma, who is the expert in virtual work. She has edited a book recently, just come out. And Melissa, who actually works at TimeWise. She's a CEO of a startup, TimeWise, and she will tell us all about that. So the event is to be, it's just to be a very inclusive. That's why we have organized it as a Zoom event rather than a webinar. So we'd like to see you. We'd like to hear from you. And so we will have the panelists speaking for 5 to 7, 10 minutes each about the topic. And then it would be great to open to Q&A. I was thinking, how much do I need to prepare to introduce the topic of virtual work? But then I decided that either I read the entire book from Emma, or I just spoke, about our experience of virtual work. We all know what this is. We know what it means. Virtual work has brought disruption to all our routines worldwide. We have disruption and also advantages. And so it would be nice to hear today about the dark side and the bright side of virtual work. But also it has dimensions that are very subjective to individuals. I mean, we were speaking a second ago with Victoria about the fact she has people, very young people that have joined her team, but also she has people that have been there for 40 years that have to pick up all the technology knowledge that you need to be agile virtually. So a lot of dimensions, and a lot of dimensions that us as individuals cannot unpack. We don't have the understanding. So it's great to be able to share today. So without further ado, I would love to start. I think the order of the speakers that I'm going to go with is first Emma, and then Victoria, and then Melissa. And so I would like to start to ask the speakers to maybe 1 minute of introduction, and then maybe we can start with the questions. So Emma.
Hi everyone, nice to see you all. My name's Dr. Emma Russell, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Sussex in the Business School. I'm also a chartered and registered occupational psychologist, which means that as well as doing my own research, particularly in the field of email, so I look at work email and how that impacts and is impacted by people's well-being, people's personalities in terms of the choices and strategies that they use for dealing with email, and how they attempt to achieve their goals. So I researched this as part of my role at Sussex, but I'm also involved in practitioner work as an occupational psychologist, working with organisations to help them to improve their use of work email. So a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment is in the NHS and another large public sector organisation. So that's been particularly interesting over this period of the pandemic. So looking forward to speaking to you today, and thank you very much for inviting me along.
Great, thank you for having you. And Victoria,
yes,
tell us a bit about you.
Hi Cecilia, hi everyone. So I'm Victoria Curtin. I've worked in banking, investment banking and commercial banking for 25 years. Started my career in Australia, but quickly moved to London, where I've spent the majority of my career. I'm currently Regional Director with NatWest in our London and South East corporate and commercial business. So I've currently got a team of 80 relationship managers that are responsible for the corporate relationship management of quite recognisable names, but UK businesses. And a team that actually spans, as Zahira said, people from apprentice level. I've had 4 new apprentices start in January. We have graduate intakes, and we've got a lot of long-term career bankers within our business. We pivoted to a full working from home basis actually prior to the lockdown, but fully in expectation of the lockdown. And virtual working is something which will actually stay as part of our go forward strategy as well. So I'll talk to you more about that a little bit later on, but thank you for inviting me and really looking forward to hearing the discussion today.
Hi everyone, my name is Melissa Jameson, and I'm apparently the MBA person here, so I'm very privileged to be featuring here. This is my first panel actually event as new CEO of TimeWise. So I'll talk 1 second about TimeWise and then just a bit about myself. So TimeWise is a amazing social business that was founded by two amazing female founders 15 years ago. And we do 3 things. We do a large amount of research, thought leadership, and policy work to champion the benefits of flexibility. 15 years ago, it was why, now it's how. And in the how context, we help businesses through consultancy and training services. So we go in and help them build or enhance their approach to flexibility. Might be change programs, might be leadership programs, or just training managers to work with dispersed teams. And the third thing is we run a job site for flexible and part-time candidates. There's about 100,000 people on it, and we have an annual TimeWise flexible jobs index just to track how well flexible working is offered at the point of hire, which is a big issue for us. So as a social business, we're driven by our mission throughout the organisation to ensure people get the flexibility they need at work without compromising their careers. So that's sort of the business side. And myself, I had 20 years in communications, working in advertising and marketing. And my last job was MD of a business with about 80 people. So last year, going through COVID, I was there. And now I'm CEO of TimeWise, which is a smaller business, 25 people, but with interesting challenges in terms of everyone's a part-time worker, pretty much a lot of females, and pretty much all of them with children at home, in primary school. So the last few months has been quite extraordinary for them. And also I've done a totally onboarding, kind of virtual onboarding experience. So that's me.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. So, well, thank you so much. So nice to have 3 very compelling women here with us today for this first event. I would like to start by asking Emma very much to give us a bit of a landscape. What does virtual work mean? There are so many dimensions. As I said, we as individuals, unless we start studying it, cannot grasp. So can you give us like maybe a little bit of a landscape of what it means, but also can you pinpoint to us few issues that you think emerge as the most interesting or critical to examine and to take into account?
Yeah, sure. So certainly within the academic literature, virtual work goes by a lot of different names. So you might have read about telecommuting or remote working, teleworking. The term that I quite like at the moment is agile working, and that's because it's talking about virtual work in relation to all of the other types of work that we do. So when we think about virtual work, I think we're imagining most of the time this is working remotely from a physical shared office space and utilising digital tools and technologies in order to achieve the goals of the organisation. So you're not necessarily in an office space with your colleagues, if you have colleagues, and you're using new technology, so new communication technologies, which would include things like email, Skype, Zoom, all of these aspects to help you to undertake your work tasks and to fulfill your work role and to achieve your goals. Now, with agile working, I'm quite interested in this as a concept because I think what's particularly been highlighted by the pandemic over the recent months is that whatever happens in the future, it seems quite likely that more of us are going to be engaged in virtual work. But that doesn't necessarily mean that offices are going to close and we're not going to have any of the traditional means of working anymore. In agile work, we talk about utilising non-traditional ways of working in terms of time, so working at different times to our traditional structures of, for example, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Also thinking about working in different places, so working on our commute, perhaps working in an office, working at home, and other places where it's convenient for us to get our jobs done, and also working in different roles. So I think during the pandemic, and particularly in some of the work that I've been doing with the NHS, that's been really salient because some of the people that maybe are working normally maybe as an anaesthetist or within a GP surgery are finding themselves working in quite different roles to help deal with this particular crisis. So perhaps working at vaccination centres, or working on acute wards, helping to manage the flow of COVID patients. So agile working is very much about being more flexible in terms of both the time and the space and the role that we're engaging, and using digital tools to help us and innovative practices and innovative approaches to help us. So I think some of the issues that kind of brings up, if you like, in terms of the future of work and the future of virtual working is that we're now having to be much more mindful about how we manage some of the traditional boundaries between work and home. So as a psychologist, I'm really interested in this from a well-being perspective, because we do know that every day all of us need time to psychologically detach from our work in order to recover our resources, to replenish our energies and to go on to do effective work the next day. But what can happen sometimes when we're engaged in virtual work or agile working is that those boundaries between work and home become quite blurred, and our ability to psychologically detach from our work becomes much more problematic. So we know that there are kind of three main boundaries that we need to be mindful of in order to try and manage that work-home divide. And those boundaries relate to temporal boundaries. So making sure we say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to be working from 9 till 2 today. And then again, I'm going to be working from 5 till 7. And I'm not going to be dealing with work at times beyond that. That might be a strategy for managing our time boundaries. We might also have boundaries for place. So I'm going to be working at my kitchen table today. But as soon as I finish my work, I'm going to pack away my laptop into a box and put it under the desk so that I can't see it, and therefore I'm physically detaching myself from my work. And there's also the psychological boundaries. So these are some of the things that we might do to kind of push ourselves into work mode or push ourselves into personal mode. So we might decide, well, I'm working, so I'm going to wear appropriate work attire in order to do my job. And as soon as I finished working, out come the jogging bottoms, on go the slippers, and I'm back in home mode again. So those are some of the boundaries that we might want to think about. And what we're finding is that with more and more virtual work, more and more remote working going on, as those boundaries are slipping, what can happen is our working days can become elongated and intensified, and our home work identities can become merged together in such a way that actually makes it very difficult for us to detach. And that's where we start to see some problems such as work intensification. We're seeing problems in terms of people people's levels of anxiety, not being able to switch off at the end of the day, which is causing things like sleep disturbance. We're also seeing some other problems associated with virtual work that are not necessarily due to boundary management, but that can include things like an increase in sedentary behaviours, because we tend to sit at our desks, and sitting at our desks for prolonged periods of time without necessarily taking breaks to stretch our legs and to move about means that we're experiencing more and more musculoskeletal problems. And because we're in our kind of home environments, we don't have the infrastructure resources that can be helpful, like the correct position of our chair or the correct height of our desk or the correct size of our computer screen to help combat some of those things. So I suppose in terms of summarising where we are and where we need to be, I think it's being aware that probably virtual working is something that's going to continue in the future, but to consider it more as an agile proposition, that sometimes it's going to be appropriate to work from home virtually, and sometimes it's going to be appropriate to work in other spaces. And thinking about from an organisational perspective, what are the resources that we need to give to our workers to equip them to be able to deal with that level of agile work, to show them how to appropriately psychologically detach from their work each day, to manage their work-home boundaries, and also to ensure that we give advice and guidance on managing things like work intensification, sedentary work behaviours, etc., etc.
Thank you. That's extremely insightful. I'm going to keep the Q&A to the end, so I'd love to open it up to the end. But at the moment, I think that we can really ease into what Victoria, has to tell us. And Victoria, I'm very, very interested. We're all very interested to hear about how all this. Well, first of all, how you navigate that as a manager of 80 people, right? Because all these things, Emma just spoke about. We need to be mindful on how to manage boundaries, and then she gave us a breakdown of a ton of boundaries that we possibly had not even thought about before. So how does that manifest itself in your day to day? What would you like to tell us about this?
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating to hear Emma speak, actually, because so much of it is borne out in reality. So yeah, as I mentioned, I run a regional business, and prior to lockdown, we were located across 10 separate offices. I've got a management team, they have a management team, and quite a collaborative culture, but also quite a hierarchical structure too. And the diversity in terms of the people within our business is huge. Sort of age, background, culture, gender, experience. So there was a full range. So we stood up working from home as a bank, which I will reveal, for a number of years as a working parent, I have worked from home ideally one day a week. So as a concept, I was quite comfortable with it. Moving to 100% working from home was slightly terrifying, and I had to take people on the journey with me. But we had to stand it up very quickly, and we had to respond to the pandemic and the crisis, the economic crisis that was unfolding very quickly. And that created an element of unity and common purpose, which was one of the more powerful aspects to us being able to effectively transition to a completely different working model. The common strategy, the aligned purpose, the mutual vision, that was something which really, really helped. And irrespective of whether there's a crisis, hopefully there won't be any more crises in the near future, but the learning is very, very relevant, and that is working virtually and working from home, and to really get the best out of everyone as a team as well. It's having that clarity of purpose and that mutual strategy or that common vision. So that's something which is really, really key. But top of my list, I went to the bottom of my list here, but top of my list in terms of how to engage and motivate and to run a business effectively through virtual working. There are three key components, and they are the tools. So as Emma said, the resources. What are the resources that are needed to do this? They're digital resources, but they're also more than that in terms of tools. What is the strategy? That's the second thing. And thirdly, and most importantly, I would say, is the culture. And that culture is something which has to be dynamic and responsive through a virtual working environment. And you've got to use the tools to be able to respond or to support that dynamic changing culture. So there are a few things that I thought I would mention, and apologies if they're not in a structured order as I would like, but probably reflects the workings of my mind. So keeping in mind, it's all about the tools, the strategy, and the culture. With that as well is communication strategy. So as I mentioned, so I run a business. I have a management team, they run teams, they themselves have different levels of line management within it. So communication strategy has always been important. I've got to say something which can talk through the layers, but through virtual working and remote working, communication strategy is sort of on steroids, absolutely sort of so important. And that communication strategy has got to come through different mechanisms as well. There's got to be a clarity of the message, and there's got to be empathy within the communication. And that is one of the key differences between my communication strategy pre-lockdown and my communication strategy now working virtually, is I've really dialed up the empathy. I'd like to think it was always there, and that was my characteristic of being a leader, but I've most definitely dialed it up. And I don't think you can dial it up too far. It's really, really important. But with the empathy, you've also still got to have that clarity and some certainty that you can provide. But communication strategy as well needs different channels. So it can't just be in a virtual working environment. It just can't be a leader-led communication strategy. It can't just be a one-way message. It has to utilize leader-led, advocate, engaged, peer-to-peer examples, uses of spotlights. It's got to be we can only use digital tools here, but I use Skype and Messenger far more frequently than I used to previously. I use WhatsApp groups far more frequently. I use Zoom and Teams for the video communications. I use the telephone. I know this sounds really simple, but mixing it up and using those different channels to support your method of communication is also really, really important, as well as the different groupings. So coming on to different groupings, the other thing as well, which has helped our business perform strongly through working from home, has been the focus on creating connections with people as well. So as mentioned, I've hired, I've fired as well through the period, and I've implemented a new operating model as well in some of my teams. So we've had quite a bit of change, but through, again, each of those processes, as well as people who are still continuing in role, and I know what I've thoroughly enjoyed is the ability to create new connections through this period. I do definitely have days where personally I feel very isolated, talking to a video screen, but talking by myself in my office at home. But the opportunity to create connections with new people through virtual working has been really positive, both for me, but then cascading those connections as well to my wider teams. So that's something I would describe as both virtual networking, so important. People are far more receptive to the virtual networking, but the power of that networking is really relevant. And with that as well, I will refer to what I call the water cooler moments, or random chats, which I used to really enjoy in the office. And it's harder to do working virtually, but it's not impossible. And so with this theme of creating connections and using different communication channels, across my business, I've set up different cohorts of learning groups and different cohorts of experience to support peer-to-peer learnings. But we also introduced what we called a coffee roulette. So we arranged every 2 months, 3 people from within my wider region were randomly selected, and they were not allowed to talk about work, but they had to meet up on Zoom during work hours with a cup of coffee and talk about them or anything other than work. And these random selections were very carefully manufactured, I have to reveal, but carefully manufactured to ensure that they were people who didn't work closely with one another. So they had a sense of newness to them. And then we rotated them, and the coffee roulettes were a fantastic success in terms of bringing people together. But it was one part of the different ways that we tried to create these connections. And we were very deliberate about it. So just a couple of other points, if I may. One other strapline that I would say in terms of making virtual working success is the call out that it doesn't happen by accident. Success does not happen by accident. It is very much strategy, and it's deliberate, and it goes back to how you use the tools, you set the strategy, and you sort of nourish the culture. And the things that I did, which I thought I would share, was I put a real emphasis on building capability. I put a real emphasis on my communication strategy, so leader-led, leader-endorsed, peer-to-peer, and then it becomes self-fulfilling. I also put a real emphasis in appreciating and recognizing the different styles of contribution from each of my team members. And to the point around culture, I had spent some time prior to remote working focusing on psychological safety, but I really reinforced it during this period. And a culture of psychological safety at its core is one where you have trust and confidence, and it just, again, nourishes. And I've also dynamically adjusted. I used to have monthly board meetings with my management team, and they were fairly structured. And sometimes actually they were just dreadfully dull, because we would run them from 9 o'clock in the morning to about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was usually one-way download from a series of experts or other leaders from around the business, people from outside, and it was exhausting, and it was relevant perhaps for the time, but absolutely not relevant for a virtual working environment. And so I adjusted. And now I have a performance forum, a 1-hour performance forum once a month, where it's really fast. We have 20 minutes across each of our key priorities. That's not to say it's only 20 minutes per month. We do a lot of work in between. But in the afternoon, I have 2 hours allocated for what I have called it is all about how we as a management team can share some new practices or things that have occurred, so we can collaborate and we can reset or reframe our priorities for each of our respective teams to take forward. And that's been really powerful. I'm going to have to adjust it again as we move into a blended working model, but that ability to dynamically adjust, don't just stick with what you have, make those adjustments. And to finish off, sorry, Zahira, I'll just say, in terms of outcomes, we've had the highest employee engagement scores that we've ever achieved in the last few months, and our business and activity levels are really smashing it out of the park. So it can be a very productive period. Thank you.
What can I say? So, Victoria, I kept on taking notes and 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 notes, because what you're saying is super interesting, brings things into practice, shows adaptability. You said you were saying things that were not structured, they were very structured. Thank you so much. But I think that one of the most interesting things that I heard from you was the word empathy, psychological safety, and the fact that it doesn't happen by chance, right? You have to structure it, you have to think about it. This is brilliant. Also, Victoria and I have never met in person. We also are the product of, our relationship is a product of virtual networking, right? So it's quite interesting how you can create connections virtually. So that's great. Thank you so much, Victoria. That was extremely interesting. I'm sure a lot of food for thought for everyone here. And we have Melissa, last but not least, our alumni from our MBA. And we're always, always so proud of people that go and become CEOs from our MBA. So Melissa, tell us all about your work with TimeWise, which is about flexible work, but also what is the connection between flexible work and virtual work, right? I mean, you were saying something very interesting before.
Hi, everyone. The last two sort of presentations or conversations were great, because there's a lot of common connections with everything everybody said from the perspective of what TimeWise does. And I just think it's important that a lot of what we've been talking about is that we've been through a universally sort of enforced virtual home working experience. And I think we need to make the distinction that what we've been forced to do in the last year is not really what good flexible and virtual working looks like. It's kind of been everything with the pandemic, extraordinary. And I think we need to just recognize that when we talk about the negatives and the positives of it. And I've heard it expressed as we've been through a virtual working experiment where for many full-time work meets full-time life, just a collision for people, which I think is a great expression for it. From TimeWise's perspective, good flexible working has always been at its heart connected with positive aspects of employee well-being and engagement. We like to talk about where people work, when they work, and how much they work. And I think that's really important in this conversation about well-being, because those are all critical factors in how people achieve the work-life balance that they need or they want, and also what gives them a sense of control over their lives. Reflecting on the employer perspective, obviously, we know, working with lots of different types of businesses, that getting flexible working right supports a whole load of good tangible and intangible benefits. Stronger employer brand, talent attraction and retention, diversity and inclusion, and also a more motivated workforce. So I think the connections between getting good flexible working and within that virtual or remote working is all connected with employee well-being and employee engagement. I think another positive is that it's really important to recognise that a lot of the reasons that traditionally have been used to challenge the adoption of flexible working and good flexible working before COVID have now really been debunked. And although it's more in the area of where we work as opposed to when and how much we work in terms of part-time, it has been really good for that. It's kind of democratized the conversation around how should we work, allowing others to sort of see into our homes, and it's humanized us. It's also taken away that the hidden aspect of a lot of people who have been virtual workers or have been part-time workers who come in and out of the office. It's kind of made everyone experience that and understand how that feels. It's also uncovered really dramatically how much people want flexibility. And I think that links back to well-being. I think that links back to work-life balance. You know, survey after survey has said that the majority of employees, and more so with the younger generation, want some form of flexibility, some form of home working or hybrid arrangement, and control about how they work moving forward. So as a result, COVID has actually made flexible working, and within that virtual working, and within that well-being and employee motivation, a sort of boardroom imperative in a way I don't think it's ever quite been before. So I think that's really exciting. I mean, I know we've touched on, and I won't go into it, a lot of the issues that people have always experienced, the negatives around COVID and this sort of enforced virtual working. You know, well-being considerably under strain, blurred boundaries, work creep, digital presenteeism, you know, all the different things that we've talked about. But there's another aspect to it which I think is concerning, which is around the sort of equality, diversity and inclusion perspective, where we've learned that not everyone is having the same experience anyway. Gender, role, sector inequalities have been identified, as well as age inequalities, and quite well documented. So there is a risk in our organizations of creating a kind of two-tier workforce, the flex haves and the flex haven'ts, the ones that can do their job and work from home and get a certain amount of flexibility, and others, you know, what 50% of the workforce are sort of frontline workers, and they don't really get a choice at the moment. And that's one area that we work quite strongly with businesses to help. So I think that issue of fairness and consistency really needs to be addressed in organizations and the broader labor market. And I think that, again, you know, goes back to how people feel about work and where they're working. Because if they feel that one person's got a deal that means they get more flexibility and they have more control in their lives and somebody else doesn't, well, that's not great in a business context. And when you want teams to work together and to integrate and to feel that we're all one culture and we're all working together on that. So I think you asked me just to sort of talk about what are some of the challenges, you know, for businesses currently. And I think one of the big questions confronting employers currently is how do they meet the demand for some sort of flexible and home working or hybrid working arrangement in a way that works for both businesses and employees, and how can that be done fairly? And for a lot of clients who have come to us as they're trying to adopt or embed general flexible working practices, there are some underlying sort of issues that are broadly fall into four areas, which again, Victoria and Emma have kind of talked about really. One is from an organizational perspective, the need to overcome a reactive culture and behavior towards flexibility. So shifting from flexible working in a reactive way where it's kind of request response, where the individual asks their manager that they need some sort of flexibility, into what is a far more proactive mindset. We call it the sort of flexible maturity scale. And what's really interesting is there are those sorts of conversations that don't happen, but that need to happen. If we don't talk openly and upfront about flexibility in organizations and in our teams. So I think from the organization perspective, that change of culture and behavior, not thinking, oh no, we're going to let the floodgates open and it's going to be a nightmare, but actually to have the proactive conversation about how we deal with it. And it's something that Victoria kind of mentioned, that kind of not just waiting, but actually purposefully moving forward and dealing with it. From a leadership perspective, it's about making flexible work part of a boardroom issue or part of a management leadership issue. It's not really any longer possible to rely on flexible working policies and then just hope that people are able to navigate them and use them. And that again works back to well-being. You know, from my experience in my last job, you know, when somebody says, oh, well, everyone can work one day away, you know, one day a week from home. Well, that doesn't work. That you know, how do you as a manager engage with that? How do people understand that? Does that mean everyone can do it all the time? But what if you have a client meeting? You know, it's just not able to be that sort of just here's the policy and then get on with it. So we think leadership teams must develop clear visions around their sort of flexible working and communication about it. So clear guidance and a kind of flexible working framework to define what it means for the organization. So what are the parameters, what's possible, what's not, and what are the myths that need busting to support the vision. I think one of our businesses had a vision that was along the lines of, not everyone will have the same flex, but every role should have some flexibility. And I think that's a great kind of sense of how you can understand when you've got very different departments and different roles, you know, especially if you're, for example, at council, where, you know, some are office based, some are out doing key working activities. How do you work that through? So from a management perspective, it's about skills. It's about equipping managers to job design and to understand how flexible team management and communications work. You know, we've just expected managers to do that, but actually understanding how to design work differently and understand the leadership vision and parameters by which sort of for the people from when or where or how to manage dispersed teams is really important. You know, for managers to manage teams, it matters they understand and think about how much people work, when people work, and where they work. If they don't do all those three things, then they're not really able to navigate the dynamics of a team when you know, let alone at the moment everyone's virtual, but at some point it's going to go more hybrid, and you know, people working in different ways. And for a manager, how do they do that? And then finally, from a team perspective, it's trust and delegation issue. Being prepared as a leadership team to devolve and trust teams to develop their own flexible working solutions is really critical. One size doesn't fit all, simply doesn't. So a team-based approach that empowers them to have the right conversations once they know what the framework is within which they can have those conversations is really critical. And also performance managing by outputs, not inputs. So not by the number of hours you've worked, but the tasks that you have to deliver. So those are the sort of four themes that come up again and again in terms of when businesses are struggling or trying to tackle flexible working, or more recently hybrid working. Those are the sort of places that we have to say, right, well, you need to start here, because it's, you know, culturally you're just sort of hoping no one's going to mention it. You know, you've got to move to the front foot where you're actively celebrating flexibility, but setting the parameters of what that means for the business. You know, it's not about everyone just able to choose. Some businesses are, but a lot aren't. They have to set parameters. Yeah. So I think that's the sort of core part. I suppose there are there's some advice that we kind of give everybody, and it's similar to that. It's sort of built upon those challenges for people, which is the first thing is understand what needs to change. So you need to objectively assess where you are in your flexible working practices. How proactive are you talking about flex working or virtual working? What do your policies say, and how are they understood in practice? You know, there's a lot of policy in practice. Well, it's fine to say it, but actually we're not doing it. And so by properly reviewing kind of current culture, organizational structure, working practices, and then looking at that data, you can kind of identify what really needs to change. Then develop a clear leadership vision, as I've sort of already explained, you know, some principles and frameworks that are communicated again and again to everybody. So everyone's clear about the parameters within which they're working, and managers have some sort of guardrails to navigate by. Really plan your actions and resources. You know, you can't expect to do all this and not think that actually people might need more time or more space to be able to enable some of these conversations to happen. Train your managers. So, you know, we've talked about that, you know, absolutely empower them to be able to discuss flexible frameworks with their teams and how that works. Create and communicate clear set of principles. So to Victoria's point, you know, as people come back to work in a hybrid sort of situation might occur, how do they support their dispersed teams? You know, is everyone always coming into the office for onboarding? Will performance reviews happen in the office or remotely?
Lisa.
And then just hardwire evaluation into it. So you've got the benchmarks. When you start, make sure you keep reevaluating it, because staff won't, if they don't hear what the businesses are trying to do and the improvements they're trying to make, then it won't feel an authentic approach to trying to help employees get the flexibility they need, and the sort of well-being aspects of that. So I think that's
lovely. Thank you so much. You brought in so many dimensions. I'm gonna just very quickly mention some of them. One of the thing that really resonated with me was this idea of flexibility scale. So looking at flexibility dimensions, I also quite like this idea, the 3 dimension of flexibility, the how, the when, and the where. And I really liked the idea of management training for flexibility, what it means. As Victoria, I guess, or has been able to think about it as she's done. But at the moment, a lot of people are really instinctively managing along some lines that they think might work. But we do not have a structured way of approaching this. So, I think that the work you're doing is really closing the gap between, the incredible theory that Emma's brought in and some more practical, as you say, practice-driven solution. And, maybe the order could have been to have Victoria now, because she would have brought us the solution, right? So we've gone from very abstract to less abstract, more practical driven, to extremely practical with Victoria. So really nice nuance of speakers. Thank you so much, all of you. I would like to open the floor to some questions. And I already have a question here from one of our attendees, Yung Fu, who I think she might be attending from China, actually. And she has asked the question, which we have avoided, but is always there. And it's about virtual work impact female workers more than male workers. How are we going to deal with this? Now, we don't have an hour to answer this, okay? So this was actually directed to Victoria. So I would like Victoria maybe to pick it up first, because we have a lot of data about this. I mean, I see data as an academic every day, and I'm sure that Melissa and Emma also see the data about this. How do you deal with this practically on an everyday basis, Victoria?
Yeah, and I am one of those impacted female workers, because I cook all the dinners, I prepare all the lunches, I do all the homeschooling, and I work full time, as well as my husband, who I love, but we have definite sort of old-fashioned separation of duties. But the thing that I've found, there are a number of different ways, though, that I would look at this. So I do have quite a few male colleagues who have had an emotional effect, and they also have time impacts as well, working from home. So I have realised it's not unique to women. I do think it's disproportionate, but it's not unique. And one of the positives, which is not spoken about so often, but I think it's an important counterbalance to it, is I also have a number of really talented women in my business who, for a number of years in the physical environment, have always been considered maybe not sufficiently charismatic or sufficiently proactive or vocal. And as I say, in the physical environment, so whether it be sat around the board table or in meetings with clients, they would take the quieter role. What virtual working has done is it's given a little bit more of a level playing field for the different personality types to really shine through. And this is something that I think is really important for us to take forward, as well as we move into yet another way of working. But I've had a number of really exceptional female, quieter colleagues absolutely shine through virtual working, because their voice on Zoom is just as loud as my voice. By the way, I'm 5'10". I always wear high heels. I use huge hand movements. And so I conversely had to learn, how do I make an impact over a digital communication channel, when I realized how much I used to rely on my physical presence and that side of it. So it's a different perspective to the question. Females, yes, I think have disproportionately shared the burden. How do we address it? We've got to find the different ways of the how and the why, but then there are also some silver linings to it as well.
Yeah, good. And maybe this empathy you were talking about is really a way to deal with it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Tuning into other people's needs, tuning our people's needs when you're managing them. It's interesting. I'm writing a paper about empathy in leadership, and it's standing out as shining through as a leadership quality like it's never done before during this pandemic. So very, very interesting. Anyone, Melissa or Emma, want to speak about this? I
suppose
I have another question as well, whatever. Yeah.
Oh, the only bit I would add to that is I don't think you can talk about the sort of impact on women without really talking about not just virtual, but how it's affected part-time, women working part-time as well. And I think what the pandemic has done is simply brought to light in a far more visible way something that was quite invisible, which has always been a problem around the sort of the obligations, the sort of dual obligations of work and home for many, many women, and yet the lack of quality part-time flexible opportunities. And I think that is the pandemic has simply emphasized that, but it's constantly been a problem. And that's why TimeWise was set up 15 years ago, to be honest, was all around part-time. They now talk about being gender neutral because everybody should, in theory, everyone should be able to, because if we can have more flexibility, that means there can be more balance in the home, there can be more balance in life. But there are some very hard areas, and one part of that is part-time. And I think that has shown through the pandemic, it's just been emphasized.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. We only have a few minutes. I have another question. Maybe we can get Emma to take this one. So
I've got a quick question.
Yes.
Well, if there's a minute. Yeah, it's a question. Actually, it's a bit addressed at Emma, but maybe Victoria too. And it's about well-being. It's about workers being nourished in a very different situation. I wrote down the word nourishment, and I was really pleased to see Victoria address that just after I'd written the word down, actually, because I think there's something that needs to be done, essentially, about re-nourishing people in a situation where appetites are not satiated, are they? Let's not pretend that we're not in a situation where there's many privations for people. And, some people will deal with those privations better than others. I mean, you made a point about different personality types as well. I observe lots of really happy introverts who can hide in meetings, they can contribute whenever they like, and extroverts who are bouncing around their offices, bedrooms, because they're not getting nourished. And I think it means that we need to add something all the time to the whole concept of virtual working, which, by the way, there'll be loads more of. I mean, a really quick financial point. Victoria might disagree with this, but anybody in the capital departments of businesses are looking at the spectacular savings they're going to make on their estates. They're going to keep us. We will be kept to much more home working. Of course we will. So, how do we nourish it is the short question to my long-winded one.
No, that's lovely, Jim. Thank you so much for your intervention. Maybe we should have made this event longer. We were really afraid, but actually I'm now regretting we haven't. Emma, something about that from a psychological perspective.
Yeah, so I think there's the issue of kind of what we all need in terms of nourishment, but then also individual differences and what individual people need from virtual working. So what we all need is there's 3 key psychological needs that we try to achieve in our work, and that is a sense of autonomy, so feeling in control of our work, a sense of competence, so feeling that we're doing a good job and that we're efficacious in our work, and a feeling of relatedness, that we're connecting with other people and that we feel seen and recognised, and a sense of belonging in our work. So with virtual working, all of those needs are potentially challenged, because we have this paradox of autonomy, where we think now we have all this freedom and liberation, but actually we're more and more tethered to our desks and our work and our technologies. We have this issue of relatedness. We're finding brand new ways of connecting with people, yet we've never felt more isolated. And of course, we have the issue of competency, because particularly relating also back to the female issue, the ability to be productive versus the ability to be there and seen and present are often quite contrasting issues. So we have women who at the moment we know are disproportionately taking on their share of the housework and the homeschooling. So the Office for National Statistics has released figures to show that this is absolutely the case. And we see the manifestation of that in things like academia, where journal editors are reporting that fewer and fewer women over the course of the pandemic have been submitting journal papers. And therefore, we're immediately starting to see that women's productivity is being affected because they're taking on this share of the work.
Yeah.
So we need to address those needs. We also need to address individual differences in terms of, you mentioned introverted people, but we know, for example, neurodiverse people, they actually respond quite well to virtual working, because text-based communications are much clearer to them. They don't have all of the noise of the non-verbal communication that can actually be confusing. So someone who has neurodiverse issues such as autism probably is finding digital communication works really well for them. If you're an extrovert, however, this is probably not the way that you like to work, because you're not getting all of the social stimulation and variety from the environment that usually is really important in energizing you, like helping you to do your best work.
Like you need to organize a speaker series, for example.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Emma. That's brilliant. I am very, very mindful that we have run out of time. We have 2 more questions. So I want to check with everyone with time. Speakers, how are you doing? Am I holding you back? Do you have 1 more minute? You okay with it? Okay, so everyone, if you want to stay, we're going to stay a couple more minutes. I have 2 questions. One is about what happens to creativity, the creative process and innovation in this situation. I wouldn't know what to say there. Maybe we need Emma. Maybe someone else has got also an ability to answer this question. And the other one, and I think that Victoria and Melissa might be better positioned for this one, is how has the interviewing process changed for job interviews? So shall we start with the job interviewing perhaps, and then maybe go to the innovation? Victoria, what's your story there? And then Melissa as well.
Well, it's got more efficient, certainly from my side, though, but I haven't been a candidate. I've just interviewed. So, and I know Melissa has gone through her unique experience as sort of moving in, but it's become more efficient. It's definitely, it requires additional prep work and follow-up work, but there is an ability to be able to really get into the detail of the aspects that you want to draw from your interview. So I would actually prefer to continue interviewing virtually. Where I used to have to set aside 2 hours, I can now set aside 1 hour. And it's not that it's dispensing with the niceties or the formalities, but it's just it's enabled us to be far more direct. But that's also with the benefit of a very rigorous and established framework of which we work through, identifying critical people capabilities and really knowing what it is that we want to get from it. So we come from having a place where we've got a lot of resources.
Lovely, great, thank you so much. Melissa, tell us about, because Melissa was onboarded as a CEO of a new company during the pandemic. So
yeah, well, it was very interesting in terms of, I think it took a lot longer. I mean, I think it depends on what position you're going for. and therefore, you know, the cultural aspect of what you're like as a person, you know, the sort of will you fit in dynamic when you're being picked as a leader of a business is even sort of more important possibly than depending on certain roles that you're looking at within the business. So I think that was probably the hardest bit, both for myself and probably for the interviewers, in a sense that you get so far in terms of knowing they've got the abilities and they've got the capabilities from a skill and experience point of view, but it's very hard to get under the skin and have that kind of chemistry that you can have when you first sort of meet somebody. I think it's good in a way that sometimes that chemistry stops you looking, being an employer sometimes, at you know, what the person's skills are. It can sometimes blind you because you just get on with the person. So I think in that way the interview process online is good, but it was very hard, the final sort of moments where you still haven't met the people, you still can't really understand how that deeper chemistry works, especially if you're being, you know, you're going to have to work very closely with the team.
Right.
So yeah, that would be.
That's brilliant. Just from my perspective, I know I'm not one of the speakers, but I am starting to use and put together a research project to start to investigate how there are new AI-driven interview apps that actually interview graduates, especially for starting levels. And, you know, so there is a lot going on in the space, which is unexplored. So we are starting really to look from a research perspective to how that, for example, impacts social mobility, right? So, you know, if you're measuring professionality, whether it's by measuring the expression, the movement of the hands, our concept of professionality, I'm mentoring 2 kids. One has got professional parents. One doesn't have professional parents. One is a chef, another one is a cab driver. You do not pick up these, you know, skills about what do you do in front of a camera when you are, you know, a lawyer, or when you are, you know, an investment banker. And so it's quite interesting, very, very big topic that we can explore. Last question, and then I think we need to go. Creativity and innovation. Do we know how has this been impacted? Emma, maybe you have an insight on this?
Well, we know that enforced change can be one of the biggest catalysts for inspiring creative and innovative practices. And I think probably all of us can relate to that in terms of the new approaches to work and the new tools and technologies that we've had to learn about and devise as a result of the pandemic. You know, really having to be quite creative about how we get our work done in the way that we want to now that things have changed. Certainly in terms of agile working, I've seen quite a lot of inspiring innovative practices as a result of the pandemic. I wouldn't say this is necessarily related to virtual work, but just in terms of how people are renegotiating the time and space and the roles in which they work. So we've started to see with things like the furlough scheme, how useful and important working less of the time can be in terms of inspiring creativity. And there's been some discussions therefore about kind of reinvigorating debates about things like the 4-day week, the notion that everybody should have a day off a week where they can literally just be. So they can work if they want to, they can relax, they can do voluntary work, they can master a new skill or a new hobby. And the impact that that has on creativity, innovation, and just developing your cognitive skills and productivity. So there have been organisations that have said as a result of this period of time that they're very much considering going to permanent 4-day weeks in the future. And then another example would be, again, because of the redundancies and furloughing within the airline industry, what the NHS has done recently is they've taken on people from Virgin Airlines cabin crew who can't do their jobs at the moment and potentially never will do their jobs again to work in the vaccination centres. And that's been really interesting for them in terms of sharing approaches, sharing ways of working, because for NHS staff, they're seeing people that are highly trained in customer service and the customer is always right, operating these vaccination centres and very much learning about new skills for dealing with patients and the public. Not to say that NHS workers weren't already absolutely fantastic at that, but I think it's learning new approaches.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think your first sentence was really the nut of the matter here. I mean, like, forced change pushes you in order to survive, you have to be creative. We have to create new ways of working. Fantastic. Lovely. Any more comments, any more questions? It's been a very full session. Super interesting. I really enjoyed it. I would like to research all of you, apart from Emma, who I am researching with rather than. I would love to, well, it's been a wonderful opportunity for virtual networking, I hope. Victoria, we already love you in the business school. We would love to be able to invite you to more events if you're open, maybe in the future. I will get in touch with you. Melissa, the same with you. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being such a bright alumna and for making us so proud from Sussex MBA. And Emma, thank you so much for being such a wonderful colleague and always stepping in. It's lovely. Thank you very much. A big clap. This would be the time in which we give you a bit of a clap. And thank you so much for being here. I'm going to close the meeting. And hopefully this was a very successful first session. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks very much. Excellent.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
you.
Thanks, Zahira.
Thank you so much. Bye.
I'm going to do the cooking and cleaning and lunches now.
Go, Jim. Fight for us all. Bye.
Bye all. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.